And I think that the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops needs to actually look in the mirror a little bit and recognize...
Sharp words from the top levels of the U.S. government for the Catholic Church's efforts to help refugees. We talk to Catholic leaders with deep experience in this field to better understand their work.
And this year's theme is Life, Why We March. Why are you marching?
I'm marching to be a witness to the gospel of life.
The March for Life, as vibrant as ever, 3 years after the overturning of Roe versus Wade, a look at what's new and the emphasis going forward. The Catholic world offers its prayers and support for the victims of the plane crash on the Potomac. And the Supreme Court takes on some blockbuster cases with impact for religious values in the classroom. EWTN News In Depth starts now.
I think the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops has frankly not been a good partner in common sense immigration enforcement that the American people voted for, and I hope, again, as a devout Catholic, that they'll do better.
The Vice President of the United States calls out Catholic bishops in front of a Sunday morning national audience, accusing the Church of being more interested in the federal money they receive than its humanitarian mission. It was a blindside no one expected. Welcome to EWTN News In Depth. I'm Colin Flynn, sitting in this week for Catherine Hadro. The Vice President's sharp criticism on Face the Nation went much further, and other voices in Washington extended the verbal assault to Catholic charities. It was a tangle between the new Trump administration and legacy programs within the Catholic Church that caught many off guard as rhetoric escalates over immigrants, deportations, and open borders. Mark Irons has our first report.
Early in his second term, President Donald Trump is praising his administration's crackdown on illegal immigration following a flurry of executive orders and deportation raids.
For the first time in history, we're loading dangerous and illegal aliens into military aircraft and flying them back to the places from which they came.
A nation has the responsibility to protect its citizens and the right to control its borders. Catholic Church teaching makes that clear. And it's echoed by Bill Canny, the Executive Director of Migration and Refugee Services at the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops.
Enforcement is the right, and regulation of our borders is the right of a nation. I just want to be very clear about that. The bishops have never been for open borders.
But the Church also recognizes the rights of migrants and refugees, and Catholic bishops are concerned with a number of Trump administration immigration enforcement actions. Writing in statements in part, the use of sweeping generalizations to denigrate any group, such as describing all undocumented immigrants as criminals or invaders to deprive them of protection under the law, is an affront to God, who has created each of us in his own image. One Trump administration directive allows officials to conduct immigration arrests at sensitive sites, including churches and schools. In a CBS interview Sunday, Vice President J.D. Vance defended the policy.
So of course, if you have a person who is convicted of a violent crime, whether they're an illegal immigrant or a non-illegal immigrant, you have to go and get that person to protect the public safety.
The bishops had previously stated, "We are already witnessing reticence among immigrants to engage in daily life, including sending children to school and attending religious services. All people have a right to fulfill their duty to God without fear." The vice president said as a practicing Catholic, he was heartbroken by the way bishops are responding.
And I think that the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops needs to actually look in the mirror a little bit.
Vance then seemed to question the bishop's relationship with the U.S. refugee admissions program. With an executive order, President Trump has halted refugee admissions, but the federal program provides funds to a number of nonprofit and faith-based groups who for years have helped the government resettle vetted refugees after they've been accepted into America. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops is one of those organizations.
When they receive over $100 million to help resettle illegal immigrants, are they worried about humanitarian concerns, or are they actually worried about their bottom line?
Suggesting the bishops could be motivated to help migrants for monetary gain, we asked Bill Canny if the Bishops' Conference profits off the refugee program.
Absolutely not. Anytime anyone perhaps doesn't have a hold of the facts, is disconcerting.
And Cardinal Dolan, who prayed at President Trump's inauguration, said he was really disappointed with the vice president's remarks.
This was not only harmful, this was inaccurate. Yeah. You heard what he said. Oh, the bishops, they're pro-immigrant because of the bottom line, because they're making money off this. That's just scurrilous. Yeah. That's very nasty, and it's not true. Right. You want to come look at our audits, which are scrupulously done? You think we make money caring for the immigrants? We're losing it hand over fist.
Financial records from the USCCB show immigration and refugee expenses surpass the amount of federal funds they take in. And Kenny clarified the status of those refugees helped by the U.S. bishops.
No one is illegal that comes in through this program. They have been vetted by our government through what is considered the best vetting process of any immigrant category to the country.
Inspired by the gospel mandate to care for the least among us, Catholic Charities USA provides a variety of social services for the poor and needy and works with the USCCB to administer refugee resettlement.
The Refugee Resettlement Program is a program designed especially for those who have experienced some of the greatest horrors that anybody could imagine in their countries of origin.
Tony Stieritz is the CEO of a Catholic Charities affiliate in southwestern Ohio.
Working with immigrant populations has been part of Catholic Charities' mission since we were founded in 1916.
Stieritz oversees just one of the many affiliates around the country, working with Catholic dioceses and helping refugees integrate into local communities.
About 65 Catholic charities across the country.
Canny says there are some administrative costs, but the vast majority of federal money for the refugee program goes to refugee essential services provided by Catholic charities like the one in Southwest Ohio.
We will continue to serve the poor and vulnerable however they've come here, and whatever emergency needs that they have.
But recently, the work of Catholic Charities has been inaccurately represented with misleading questions in the White House briefing room.
Does the president intend to permanently cut off funding to NGOs that are bringing illegal foreign nationals to the country, such as Catholic Charities?
And remarks from members of Congress like Republican Marjorie Taylor Greene, who said her, quote, subcommittee will be calling in Catholic Charities to find out why and to what extent they were helping illegals invade America. Stieritz says it's unfortunate to hear those remarks, especially since Catholic Charities has nothing to do with immigration policy.
We have no direction in how people come here, or the immigration policies that have them come here or not. So if the question is, are we going to serve people who come to us? The answer will always be yes, because the gospel commands us to do that. Jesus Christ commanded us to do that.
And he says the church will continue to fulfill that gospel mandate, whether or not the government provides assistance. Mark Irons, EWTN News In Depth.
Well, in the meantime, Archbishop Timothy Broglio, the president of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, he defended the bishop's support of migrants. While in Rome, he appeared on an Italian television station this week, and he said that the accusations that the bishops are profiting off government aid to refugees is false. He said the bishops will try to work with Congress to reform immigration law, but that the bishops will provide assistance to those in need because that is what Christ calls us to do. Broglio said the bishops would like to have a face-to-face meeting with the president or the vice president about the issue. We are joined now by Patrick Raglow. He's the executive director of Catholic Charities in the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City, and he has spent more than a decade working within the refugee resettlement program and has helped more than 3,000 refugees from all over the globe start a new life in the United States. Patrick, thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure, Colin. Thank you.
Can I begin by asking you to just explain how this refugee resettlement program actually works?
Sure. Catholic Charities is one of the local resettlement agencies of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. There are about 67 Catholic Charities agencies involved in refugee resettlement, and there are 9 other national resettlement networks alongside USCCB. So the Department of State vets refugees overseas, selects them for resettlement to begin life anew in this great country, and then they bring them in, and the local resettlement agency's work begins when they arrive at the airport. And so the program, there are several different programs under the umbrella of Refugee Assistance Program, But the initial one is reception and placement, just what you might think. You receive them at the airport, and then you place them into housing, school, get their ID cards, and get them into employment, ideally.
And Patrick, as you know, there was this misleading question in the White House press room this week, insinuating that Catholic charities, they help to bring illegal immigrants into the United States. Where do you think that misunderstanding comes from? I know that you've said it's important for everyone to understand that there's a difference between refugees and immigrants.
Right, and this is a common question, and it's all over the country, so I'm not surprised that a reporter might get this wrong. Every refugee is an immigrant. 99% of all immigrants are not refugees. Refugees are pre-screened and vetted, that are fleeing persecution on any of a number of protected areas and claims, so race, gender, political persecution, etc., that are being persecuted and brought in. Many times they've lived in a refugee camp for 10, 12, 13, 14 years before they are selected for resettlement. So the government's done a very thorough job of vetting. 3D holographic image scans on documents, retinal scans, fingerprints, all that other kind of stuff, all done. Every three-letter agency of the federal government that wants to know who's coming in can figure all that stuff out. And then they're brought in. And again, local agencies have no control over that. We only work with our state offices and identify how many we think we can support and absorb into the community so that they can launch and thrive and contribute to a thriving local community.
And we know, of course, immigration and deportation, they're among some of the most divisive topics in the United States right now. What are your thoughts about the rising criticism Catholic bishops and Catholic charities have faced this past week? And of course, that criticism, it might only intensify in the future.
So obviously criticism stings, but the church and the gospel call us to presume goodwill on the part of the other. And so as they share their concerns about what's going on with immigration, the church is very concerned about immigration. We are always in favor of vulnerable persons on the move, but the church is not in favor of illegality. The church indeed has argued for decades to Congress that we ought to remedy our immigration system that has consistently eluded progress by whatever administration, Democrat or Republican. Now, the Catholic Church, we're trusted, neutral, and Catholic. So by definition, we aren't pro-candidate. So we're not pro-Trump or anti-Trump, pro-Biden or anti-Biden. We are trusted, neutral, Catholic. We will argue policy all the time, but our approach is to be present to those that come our way. So we are pro the individual that finds their way to Catholic charities.
And Patrick, from that Catholic perspective, how do you strike that balance? Because we know there is huge concern in the public over national security and what is described as Americans' open borders. But as a Catholic leader helping refugees, what is your view on border security and how does that fit then with the Catholic Church's teaching of welcoming the stranger, for example?
Yes, sir. So my background, I did 22 years in the U.S. Air Force. I actually flew missions guarding the border for many, many years. So I actually probably know more about border security than most of the people criticizing what's going on. There's a lot of challenges on the southern border. And the fact that we have, as a nation, neglected to address it in a comprehensive fashion, and I'm not saying comprehensive immigration reform, in a rational fashion, contributes. I say that we should welcome those fleeing lawlessness and violence into this country, but we should do so in a way that doesn't extend the reach of lawlessness and violence into this country. Because we have not improved our immigration system, we are in fact empowering the coyotes and the traffickers and all of those other type of things. The people that are coming across the border are subject to illegality on the south of our border and north of our border, because we haven't improved our immigration system. But as a retired Air Force colonel, I am not interested in introducing threat or harm into our communities. The refugees are fully vetted. We are in close contact with the FBI office in the state, our state, federal, and local law enforcement. They are fleeing violence, not importing it. And You can always find an exception to those things, but as a practice, and then if you look at the southern border, and I don't speak for the southern border, every agency is local and every agency works under the auspices of their local ordinary, their bishop or archbishop, in the territory of the diocese and so forth. So I don't do any work. My agency doesn't do any work on the southern border. But it is inconceivable to me that the border communities are actually in greater harm because of Catholic Charities agencies helping in those communities, because the federal government already had contact with all those individuals and released them into the communities. Patrick, so can you imagine what those communities would look like if they didn't have a Catholic Charities agency to grab, shelter, shower, feed, and help send on their way? They'd be going through garbage cans or sleeping in garages or in your backyard or whatever. So clearly, Catholic Charities agencies are not causing the problem. They are only responding to it.
Well, Patrick, we know it's not easy work that you do, and you've been doing it for a long time there in Oklahoma. So thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thank you, sir. Have a great day.
You too. Along with the many executive orders on the immigration that President Trump signed in these first 2 weeks were the deportations themselves. In a large show of force, immigration agents joined by the FBI and DEA and other agencies have conducted high-profile on-camera raids in cities from New York to Chicago to Denver, with some of those rounded up being loaded onto military planes for deportation. Funding will be an issue. To maintain a steady flow of deportations, Border Czar Tom Homan says that the administration will need Congress to earmark at least $86 billion for this initiative. Removing deportees by military cargo plane is vastly more expensive than using commercial and charter flights, which was the practice of customs enforcement officials until now. Cargo planes also can't accommodate as many people as a passenger jet. Now, local officials in some areas are demanding that the rule of law be respected and reminding immigrants to know their rights and not give in to fear.
There are people in Patterson who are panicking. In fact, a very prominent priest called me yesterday and said that there were parishioners who came to him crying tears of fear. We're also receiving reports that people are not going to work, that children are not going to school, and people are reluctant to go and even visit their doctor.
It is unclear the total number of people rounded up so far or how many have committed violent crimes. Even before Archbishop Broglio made his latest comments, Catholic bishops from around the country had already responded to the executive orders on immigration and deportations, often calling for a more humane approach. A joint statement this week from the bishops of Maryland is representative of those comments. They write, "The Church has always been a home for those in search of refuge and peace, and we remain steadfast in our commitment to welcome the stranger and embrace the vulnerable." Archbishop William Lowry of Baltimore, Cardinal Wilton Gregory of Washington, and their auxiliary bishops go on to say, "We also commit to advocating for policies that protect your rights and uphold your dignity, trusting that our collective voices will help build a society rooted in compassion and justice." Meanwhile, President Trump has ordered the construction of a detention camp for up to 30,000 immigrants at the Guantanamo Bay Naval Base in Cuba. The capacity at the military site would dwarf any detention location ICE agents have within the US. The base has been used in years past to hold Haitians and Cubans intercepted while trying to raft towards the United States. But living quarters and facilities would have to be built out for much larger populations of detainees. The White House says the refugee area would be separate from the maximum security facility at Guantanamo, which is used to house terrorist suspects. Guantanamo has generally been viewed as a location of last resort because of its limited infrastructure. It could also give detainees even less access to consular and legal services than they would have in US immigration jails. EWTN News will continue to report on the immigration and refugee issue in the weeks and the months ahead to provide you with Catholic perspective and context. EWTN News In Depth is just getting started. We have much more ahead.
I'm marching for life, for all life. Children, mothers, husbands, fathers, everyone who deserves a voice and doesn't have one.
3 years after the Supreme Court overturns Roe v. Wade, the enthusiasm remains high and the crowds large at the annual March for Life. Highlights from this year's event coming up. The High Court agrees to hear cases with direct impact on religious education and the ability to opt out of public school curriculum for religious reasons.
In the end, it's quite wonderful and providential. My tragedy, my path, ended up giving me a way that I could contribute to the cathedral.
Sur la cathédrale.
And later, the faith journey of a young man from Paris, despite his disability, his special role in honoring the grand restoration of the Notre Dame Cathedral.
I believe in motherhood, and I believe in being a woman and standing up for the truth.
We're here for life. That life is the best gift. And if we don't get it right on life, we're not going to get it right on anything else.
Thousands of pro-lifers descend on the nation's capital for the 52nd annual March for Life. It's the first one held during the new Trump administration, with appearances from both the president and vice president. Pro-life advocates had much to celebrate last Friday. Just hours after the march, President Trump signed 2 executive orders to protect taxpayer dollars from funding abortion. In one executive order, Trump reinstalled what is commonly known as the Mexico City policy. It forbids taxpayer money to foreign non-governmental organizations that promote or perform abortions. Since its inception in 1985, the policy has been rescinded by every Democratic president, including former President Biden, and then re-implemented by every Republican one. In a separate order, Trump rolled back 2 Biden-era orders that he says violate the Hyde Amendment, another decades-old policy that forbids federal funds from being used for abortions in the United States. Before the announcement of those executive orders, President Trump and Vice President Vance spoke to the marchers gathered on the Washington Mall. Reporter Roselle Reyes was in the middle of it all.
Today, go home! Abortion gotta go!
Tens of thousands of people from all walks of life and from all across the country. Gathered in the nation's capital to rally against abortion and to march for life.
It feels so good to be surrounded by all these people who are here marching for the same cause. I'm really excited.
The march has been held annually in Washington since 1974. Every year, thousands march on the anniversary of the Supreme Court's 1973 Roe v. Wade ruling, which legalized abortion in all 50 states. It was overturned in the 2022 Dobbs decision, moving the focus on abortion law to the state level. But the National March lives on in hopes of continuing to build a culture of life in America. At this year's rally, a recorded video message from President Donald Trump, who promised to continue the fight against abortion.
In my second term, we will again stand proudly for families and for life. We will work to offer a loving hand to new mothers and young families, and we will support adoption and foster care. We will protect women and vulnerable children. Under my leadership, a reformed...
Trump also vowed to end law enforcement against pro-lifers and highlighted his pardoning of 23 imprisoned pro-life activists, earning cheers and praises from the audience. These pro-life activists were charged with violating the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act, or FACE Act. The crowd grew even louder when Vice President J.D. Vance addressed the rally in person, a last-minute addition to the lineup of speakers. In his speech, Vance called for a culture that celebrates life at all stages.
As you all know, the event theme this year is Life, Why We March. And there are obvious answers to the implicit question it poses. We march to protect the unborn. We march to proclaim and live out the sacred truth that every single child is a miracle and a gift from God.
Activists, politicians, doctors, and individuals shared their personal stories, taking the stage, reminding the crowd the pro-life movement still has a lot of work to do. According to March for Life data, the number of abortions is still well over 900,000 each year.
My friends,
This is half the battle, showing up. All of you here, all of you have the power to change minds. At the dinner table, on campuses, at soccer games, you can change minds. You are the voice for those who have no voice. Remember, the science is on our side. Natural law is on our side. The truth is on our side.
Some speakers highlighted the need to support women so that abortion is unthinkable.
These women, they need hope. They need encouragement. They need light in their life.
Motherhood is so empowering. It will make you tougher and happier and more fulfilled than you ever imagined possible.
After the rally, marchers organized the streets, holding signs, singing, chanting, and dancing. Students from around the nation explained why they march.
I also believe in miracles and that through being the hands and feet of Jesus, you can do anything.
I'm marching for moms, for babies, and for my grandma. She was very active in the pro-life movement, and we're all wearing her pins today, so it's really special to be here.
As Catholics, we are there to defend those, in this case, the unborn, and I'm just so excited.
This family from Vermont traveled to D.C. to spread awareness about a cause.
We felt it was important to represent babies with Down syndrome in the March for Life because they are targeted through amniocentesis and abortion. And we just felt it was important to bring that message, that their joy.
And religious communities join in every year, hoping to change hearts and minds.
We're here for life. That life is the best gift. And if we don't get it right on life, we're not going to get it right on anything else. So hopefully it's our last year.
This is about my 6th year. I think every year is different. Like you can feel the energy of the people. There are things change after 2022 with the new law. But we still feel how people care about life, and it's always energizing, and it's always awakening the hope to see how so many young people here.
In addition to this national march, March for Life organizers encouraged attendees to stay involved in the pro-life movement all year long, to attend state marches and continue to advocate for life. Rosal Regis, EWTN News in Depth.
Well, at least one of the 23 pro-lifers who had been imprisoned for violating the FACE Act made it to Washington in time to participate in the march after being pardoned by President Trump just the day before. Our Mark Irons caught up with the 76-year-old grandmother, Joan Bell, in front of the Supreme Court. Her husband picked her up from a Philadelphia jail at 1 a.m. that morning and drove her straight to Washington.
How are you feeling, Joan?
Oh, wonderful. Being here, being released on the day of the March for Life, only God could arrange that. Only God could arrange that. And so we came, and it's been a glorious day, seeing old, wonderful friends, people who have been fighting for the babies for years, loving God.
What is it like for the two of you, though, to be reunited?
It's wonderful.
It's a little hard to describe.
Yeah,
and it's a great gift because we didn't know when or how, and the pardon, we never banked on it, and we did expect, God. It's in God's time and God's will. So it's an extra gift. It's a gift we don't deserve.
I know.
We don't deserve.
I know. It's overwhelmingly beautiful.
The FACE Act was designed to increase penalties for people who obstruct access to abortion clinics or pregnancy resource centres. Now, critics of the Biden administration say that they weaponise the FACE Act against pro-life advocates. A bill has been introduced in Congress to repeal the FACE Act permanently. Next, the deadly mid-air collision in Washington. Hamas releases more hostages and Auschwitz 80 years later. News headlines in the Week in Review when we come back. A mid-air collision between a military helicopter and a commercial flight in Washington, D.C. leads the Week in Review. It is the deadliest aviation disaster in the United States in more than a decade. On Wednesday night, an American Airlines flight from Wichita, Kansas was descending into Reagan National Airport when it directly collided with an Army Black Hawk, bursting into flames and plummeting into the icy Potomac River. All 67 people, 64 on board the plane and 3 soldiers in the helicopter, lost their lives. Federal investigators are trying to piece together exactly how the experienced flight crews fatally collided. But even in the best conditions, DC's congested airways are a challenge for any pilot, and there are reports an air traffic controller was doing a job typically assigned to 2. Father Frederick Edlifson, a pastor in Northern Virginia, told EWTN News Nightly that he was at the airport that night to help the victims' loved ones find comfort and healing.
It was probably one of the most intense grief moments and situations I've ever seen in my almost 24 years of priesthood, because usually these happen within families or 1 or 2 at a time, but this was multiple families. Several people have lost several loved ones. Everybody's in total shock. They don't know what to say or how to react, and they're waiting for the best news. And I would say probably at around 1 or 1:30, about that, more or less, that's when some law enforcement from Washington, D.C. came in and told the families that there are no survivors, going from search and rescue to recovery. And it can take some time also to identify the bodies and the remains of the deceased. So that was a hard hit for those families.
Father Edlifson will offer Mass for the victims this weekend at his parish. The bishops of the Diocese of Wichita and the Diocese of Arlington have both offered their condolences and prayers for those affected. Hamas released 8 hostages on Thursday as part of the 6-week ceasefire in Israel. It's the 3rd hostage swap to take place during the truce. Masked and armed militants paraded 3 Israeli hostages through unruly crowds in Gaza, holding off onlookers as they handed them over to the Red Cross. Hamas soldiers paraded the first released hostage, 20-year-old soldier Agam Berger, in front of the destroyed home of its slain leader, Yahya Sinwar, as a, quote, message of determination. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu condemned what he called a shocking scene, and the Israeli government delayed the return of dozens of its Palestinian prisoners in response. Despite a harrowing swap, the Israeli captives and their loved ones shed tears of joy at reuniting after 15 months apart. Well, included in the exchange were 5 Thai labourers. All 8 hostages were sent to hospitals for treatment. And in exchange for these captives, Israel freed 110 Palestinians, many of whom were serving life sentences for planning deadly attacks against Israeli citizens. Later this weekend, Israel will exchange 90 Palestinian prisoners for 3 more hostages, including an American Israeli. For now, the shaky ceasefire between Israel and Hamas remains in place. It is this first 6-week phase. 33 hostages will be released, including 2 American citizens and 8 who are confirmed dead. Israel and Hamas now must negotiate a second phase in which the ceasefire would continue indefinitely and Hamas would release all remaining 79 hostages. Without an agreement, the war could resume in March. Israel says it remains committed to destroying Hamas, but Hamas says it won't release the remaining hostages until Israel fully withdraws from Gaza. Netanyahu will meet with Trump to discuss the second phase of that ceasefire at the White House next week. And Netanyahu will be the first foreign leader to visit Trump in his second term and will likely use the meeting to remind his adversaries that he has the support of the president. The leaders will meet on Tuesday. More than 500,000 displaced Palestinians have returned to war-torn northern Gaza after Israel allowed them to return earlier this week. These civilians fled the area more than 15 months ago. Many Palestinians made the long trek from southern Gaza by foot, others by motorbike or even donkey, often without enough food or water. People line Gaza's coastal roads for miles, and for some, the return means a reunion with loved ones. But many of these Gazans return to find their homeland destroyed by warfare.
The most difficult day in my life was the day of the ceasefire, when the war stopped. because on the day of the ceasefire, I understood that my home was destroyed. Where will I return to? To a tent. From a tent to tent.
The return of Palestinians to northern Gaza will pose a challenge for Israel should the ceasefire fall apart and Israel reignites its war with Hamas. Chaos in northern India as a sacred Hindu pilgrimage turned into a deadly stampede. Millions of devotees flocked to bathe in a sacred river on Wednesday, but a crowd crush broke out after pilgrims tried to get past the barricade erected for a procession. Officials took hours to announce the death toll, at least 30 dead and many more injured. Videos show ambulances desperately trying to cut through the crowds and loved ones rummaging through piles of belongings left in the aftermath. The Mahakumbha festival takes place every 12 years. The last one was in 2013. It also resulted in a stampede with 36 casualties. A somber memorial in southern Poland, where world leaders and survivors gathered this week for the 80th anniversary of the liberation of the Auschwitz death camp. 56 survivors gathered at the concentration camp to share their painful memories. Nazis annihilated more than 1 million people there during World War II, many of them Jews sent to the gas chambers in droves. But with a small group of remaining survivors in their late 80s and early 90s, many believe this will be the last observance of the anniversary at this scale. In recalling their stories of Auschwitz, survivors called on younger people to keep history from repeating itself.
Unikajmy błędów lat 30.
Let us avoid the mistakes of the 1930s when the German Nazis were not believed their intentions to create a state free of Jews, Roma, people with different views, and the sick, considered incapable and not worth living, were disregarded. Please multiply efforts to counteract views whose consequences of genocide are commemorated here today.
During the Holocaust, the Nazi regime murdered more than 6 million Jews, eradicating 2/3 of Europe's Jewish population and 1/3 of Jews worldwide. January 27th, the day Soviet soldiers liberated Auschwitz, is honoured as International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Up next, the US Supreme Court takes up some blockbuster cases with religious overtones, including one that could allow the government to directly fund religious schools for the first time ever. That report, plus expert legal analysis, when we come back. The Supreme Court has agreed to take on many high-profile cases this year. We look at some of the biggest from a Catholic perspective. Just 2 weeks ago, the justices ruled in favour of a controversial ban on the social media platform TikTok, even after President Trump asked them to do otherwise. Now Trump himself has put the law on hold, but even with executive action, TikTok's future remains uncertain.
And somebody's going to buy it, pay a lot of money, have a lot of jobs, keep a platform open, and have it be very secure.
The president is eager for a deal. On Monday, Trump told a gaggle of reporters on Air Force One that he is working to find a solution to keep TikTok online. This comes just weeks after the Supreme Court ruled the ban constitutional. The bipartisan law requires TikTok's Chinese owner, ByteDance, to sell or lose access to the app stores and web hosting services. The federal government, under the Biden administration, and lawmakers had argued TikTok poses a national security threat because of its ties to China and the personal user information it can tap into. But TikTok says the ban violates the First Amendment rights of both the app and its 170 million users. After briefly going dark in response to the court's ruling, TikTok returned within hours once Trump told his acting attorney general to hold off on enforcing the law. Now TikTok must find an American owner by April or disappear from the US.
It may have Chinese origins, but this is American people, American employees, American businesses, American lives.
In another high-profile case, the justices will decide whether Catholic Charities' work serving the poor and disabled is, quote, sufficiently religious. Wisconsin law allows religious groups to be exempt from state unemployment taxes as long as their activities are religious in nature. But state officials and the Wisconsin Supreme Court determined that the charity is not exempt because its activities, quote, neither attempt to imbue the program participants with the Catholic faith, nor supply any religious materials to program participants or employees. Catholic Charities hopes the Supreme Court will recognize service to our neighbours as a core part of the Catholic faith.
The sacramental part of the church is important. There's no question about that. But out of that sacramental life of the church comes that call to mission. And to split them, we're just denying who we are.
The court is also looking at Catholic education this term. St. Isidore of Seville Catholic Virtual School hoped to provide a high-quality, faith-based education to students throughout Oklahoma, particularly those in rural areas. It would have been the first religious charter school in America. But months before the new school year, the Oklahoma Supreme Court ruled St. Isidore's violates the separation of church and state. The Archdiocese of Oklahoma City, which would run the school, says the ruling discriminates against St. Isidore's simply because of its religious nature. The High Court agreed to weigh in and will likely hear the case this April.
We are imploring the Board of Education to respect our First Amendment rights to religious freedom.
Parental rights are at the center of McMood versus Taylor, a case from Maryland. In 2022, the Montgomery County School Board added books about pride and gender ideology into its curriculum, but it did not allow parents to opt out their children when these books are being taught. In response, a group of religious parents, including Muslims, Protestants, Orthodox Christians, and Catholics, is challenging the school board because they say the books violate their religious beliefs on sex and gender. The parents hope the Supreme Court will affirm their right to direct the upbringing of their children when it hears the case this spring. Well, for analysis on these cases, we welcome back Adam White, legal scholar and senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Adam, it's great to have you with us.
Thank you.
Let me start by asking you, the Supreme Court, it continues to put a major focus, it seems, on freedom of religion. Why do you think the justices are agreeing to review so many religious liberty cases now?
Well, I think they're hearing the cases because there are so many cases to hear. Again and again, we've seen direct conflicts, especially at the state level, between local government and state government and religious liberty. We saw this especially during the COVID-19 pandemic years, and that continues, especially in an era when you see policymaking being made very quickly on the fly by administrative decision makers.
And Adam, can you explain the question at the centre of the Catholic Charities case? Can the law really define whether the work of Catholic Charities is, quote, sufficiently religious or not?
Well, this case reminds me of an old line from Justice Scalia. I think he was the one who said that so many in government, especially on the left, they tend to think of religion as no more than what you do in the privacy of your own home and the privacy of your own mind. But of course, religion is something we live out in our daily lives. What Wisconsin has tried to do here, obviously, is to construe religion to exclude most of what religious organizations, and especially Catholic organizations, do in their charitable activities. What Wisconsin's done is really to constrain religious organizations to fail to serve their local communities.
And if we move now to Oklahoma, the story of St. Isidore's, it could become the first government-funded religious charter school in the entire nation if the Supreme Court rules in its favour. Is there a precedent for this case in terms of a school's choice?
There is, according to the school. The Supreme Court in recent years has decided a number of cases where they've said that religious organizations and schools cannot be deprived of government support that's put out on a general basis to the public at large. What complicates this case is that, according to the Oklahoma Attorney General, under Oklahoma law, charter schools are themselves public schools, and that the government's regulation of a religious charter school would deeply intertwine government and religion. And so there seems to be precedent for the arguments on behalf of the school, but it is a more complicated case, I think, than some of the recent precedents.
And how could this impact the future of school choice?
Well, it's going to vary first and foremost from state to state. It really does turn to some extent on the extent to which states try to micromanage religious schools that receive government support. But for the last decade or more, the Supreme Court has over and over again preserved a lot of space for religious education in the school choice arena. And I expect that to continue, if not in this case, then in other cases.
Adam, in Maryland, parents, they're asking the court to allow them to opt out their children from curriculum if it, for example, includes Pride storybooks. What do you envisage the justices doing in this case?
I think the justices are going to rule on behalf of the parents who do not want their children to be required to participate in this part of the curriculum. The school board is making what sounds like a very sort of even-handed appeal for the schools to be in charge of just general education. But of course, anybody who's followed these debates in our society for the last decade knows there's a lot more than just neutral education, let alone reading education, going on with the provision of these books in schools. It really is an attempt to advocate against the religious beliefs of a great number of Americans, and not just Christians. And that's what we've seen force the debate here in Maryland.
Now we're moving on to TikTok, and as he promised, President Trump has stepped in to help TikTok, giving the app an extra 75 days to find an American buyer, telling his administration not to enforce the ban. Is he defying the Supreme Court's order, or is he still working within the confines of the law?
He's not defying the court's order. The court merely held that this TikTok law does not violate the First Amendment. But what President Trump is doing in refusing to enforce the law for 75 days, it does defy the terms of that law itself. There's no provision in the TikTok law for this kind of delay. And I think that the way that it's been framed here by the president, it really does raise real questions under his own constitutional duty to faithfully execute the law. Presidents, like other executives, often have some discretion to delay somewhat or tailor the enforcement of a law for the sake of prosecutorial discretion. But what President Trump is doing here seems to go much further than that.
And what do you think will happen next? I mean, when you look at TikTok, it's one of the most popular apps in the world with hundreds of millions of users across the globe, extremely popular here in the United States. If they cannot find a buyer, what do you think will happen?
Well, I do think there's a deal to be made here. It remains to be seen, but it's anybody's guess. I'm just the lawyer, and when it's come to try to predict political outcomes in the last few years' environment, it's very, very difficult to see exactly what will happen. But I do think there's a deal here to be made.
Adam White, it's been great talking to you, and thank you so much.
Likewise.
The Supreme Court also heard oral argument in January about a Texas law that requires pornographic sites to verify the age of users. We will provide a closer look at that case next week.
It could have been worse. I'm alive. It would be an injustice if I was the only person in the universe like this. But I'm not.
Accepting God's will. Next, a wheelchair-bound man shares his Catholic perspective about his personal tragedy and his determination to be part of the rebirth of Notre Dame Cathedral. Now, last month, the EWTN News In Depth took you to the grand reopening of the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. 5 years after a devastating fire in 2019 and following hundreds of millions of dollars of reconstruction, the Gothic cathedral welcomed back the faithful to worship in a glorious ceremony followed by a joyous opening mass. I spoke to the chief architect and was able to bring you the sights and the sounds of that majestic event. And along the way, I spoke to people who were greatly affected by the reopening. Among them, Paul de Livron. Unable to physically himself help in the restoration of the great church, he found his own unique way to honour and support the rebirth of the Catholic cathedral. His artistry, reinforcing his faith. I spoke to him at his home in Paris about his faith journey in depth. The story of Notre Dame has had a profound effect on the people of France in many different ways, including Paul de Livron. Paul's life changed forever when he was 21 after a hiking accident in the south of France. Bring us back to the beginning. You were hiking with some friends, you were rock climbing 11 years ago here in France, and what happened?
Ah, c'est à peu près ça, effectivement. Il y a 11 ans, en 2013, je faisais...
Yes, you're right. It was 11 years ago, in 2013, I was hiking with two friends from the engineering school where I was a student. We were in a very beautiful park near Marseille in the south of France, and I slipped on some gravel at the top of a cliff and fell. I landed in a tree that saved my life, but I twisted my back, and that broke a vertebra and damaged my spinal cord. As a result, I lost most of the ability to use my legs, especially the ability to walk.
La possibilité de marcher en particulier.
How did you feel? Did you feel devastated? Did you feel angry?
À ce moment-là, non, j'étais ni dévasté ni en colère.
At that time, no, I wasn't. I wasn't devastated or angry. I was, I suppose, frustrated because I was a student and had plans and things I wanted to do. The summer had arrived and there were so many things I was looking forward to. I was about to travel to spend a year in the Amazon as part of my degree, but pretty quickly I realized that none of this would be possible. And instead, I was going to spend all that time in the hospital. So it was frustration, not anger. There was nobody to be angry at. I mean, who is to blame?
For Paul, the accident was catastrophic. He was never going to walk again. But amazingly, he didn't despair. What about your faith? Were you a person of faith before the accident?
Oui, je pense que...
Yes, I was a person who already had faith. And in fact, I believe I owe a lot in particular to Holy Mary for the fact that I survived the accident.
La médaille miraculeuse de la rue.
I was wearing a miraculous Medal of Mary around my neck, and I think that's what saved me.
De la Sainte Vierge.
But the way you think that Mary saved your life that day, did any part of your mind think, well, why did God allow me to have that accident?
Non. Non, parce qu'en fait...
No, because I know that accidents are part of life. And in life, anything can happen to any of us, at any time. For me, it just so happened when I was 21. And when something major happens to someone, you can get out of it unscathed. You can have a little injury, very injured, or even die. I got out of it this way, but it could have been worse. I'm alive. It would be an injustice if I was the only person in the universe like this. But I'm not. I recognize that this is just part of life.
Que les problèmes faisaient partie de la vie. Donc merci Seigneur de m'avoir sauvé la vie.
So I say thank you, Lord, for saving my life.
Paul embarked on a new mission in life, designing and hand-carving beautiful wooden wheelchairs in the hope that they would uplift other users.
Et j'étais complètement sidéré, je pense, comme beaucoup de gens en France et dans le monde.
Like many people in France and around the world, I watched all the news about the fire, wanting to know everything I could about it. I felt this desire to help in the restoration, but because of my wheelchair, even if I had the skills to help, I couldn't even access the construction site, for example. But I was able to get charred wood from the Notre Dame fire, wood dating from the beginning of the 19th century, and I was able to work this into my wheelchairs.
Paul put two dark lines at the back of his chairs, charred wood that survived the fire of Notre Dame, and he says they represent strength and resilience. That's incredible that you wanted so much to help with the restoration.
Yeah.
That this is your way.
Exactement. En fin de compte,
Exactly. In the end, it's quite wonderful and providential. My tragedy, my path, ended up giving me a way that I could contribute to the cathedral.
Sur la cathédrale.
What does it symbolize to you and represent the reopening and the restoration of Notre Dame Cathedral?
Réouverture et la restauration.
The renewal of this cathedral means it is now more beautiful than it has ever been before. And really, what I hope is that it is a metaphor for our church in France. Perhaps for the church in the world, which is going through an unprecedented crisis. I really hope that in the same way that the cathedral has come out more beautiful after its fire, that our church in France comes out resplendent as well.
Que notre Église de France ressorte resplendissante.
What an incredibly inspiring young man. And by the way, you may like to know that Paul built and presented one of his wheelchairs to Pope Francis. Finally, you might be missing the host of this program, who normally sits in this very seat every week. Well, my dear colleague, Catherine Hadro, she's been a little bit busy lately. Take a look at this. we introduced to you Lily Jean Hadro, born just a few weeks ago to proud parents Catherine and Matt. After 6 years of marriage, countless prayers, the Hadros call Lily's life a testimony to God's goodness and a reminder that God alone is the creator of life and his timing is perfect. Well, Catherine and Matt, as you can expect, are thrilled, and everyone here at EWTN, we are thrilled for them as well. Welcome, baby Lily. Catherine will be back in a few months here in the chair. And for now, that does it for this edition of EWTN News In Depth. I'm Colin Flynn. Join us again next week for more news and reports important to your Catholic life. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you then.